Wemby versus Giannis was the main attraction of this Spurs Bucks line or matchup, but a lot of other Bucks stepped up to help the Bucks get this big win. Which role player stepped up? And does role player now include bench mob Khris Middleton? We're gonna break all this down on the other side of the intro.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What it do? Welcome to Locked On Bucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Camille Davis, and joining me is Frank Madden, longtime voice of the pod and founder of brewhoop.com. We appreciate you for tuning in and making Locked On Bucks your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, as well as on YouTube. Plus, you can catch us in newsletter form as well. Head over to lockedondaily.com. Find the Milwaukee Bucks newsletter there. Sign on up. You'll get your day started off with Bucks content, NBA content, all in your inbox daily. So make sure you sign up at lockedondaily.com. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Now, Frank, this was the first time we've gotten to see Victor Wembanyama in Milwaukee. Not the first time we've seen the Wemby-Giannis matchup, but the first time in Milwaukee. And although it didn't have as many fireworks this time as their first matchup in San Antonio did last season, it was still an intriguing matchup, especially seeing how Giannis had to kind of adjust early on how he wanted to attack Wemby, seeing the Spurs trying to find different ways to unleash Wemby. But all in all, I thought it was a pretty fun matchup, seeing these two really unique players being able to go one-on-one and seeing situations where Giannis is picking him up one-on-one, won that defensive matchup, and really, doing well with it.
Well, it was fun for us because Wemby basically had, that one-footed three and that crazy up and under, like pretty lucky because, I mean, the way he threw it up in the air, clearly wasn't when he got defended by Giannis driving against him. I mean, I don't think he was necessarily trying for exactly that shot, but had those two highlights early and then nothing. Basically, that was it. So, I mean, I think for the impartial viewers, I'm sure it was a bit of a letdown, but that works for us. That's just fine. I think Wemby bothered Giannis a couple times on drives defensively, but for the most part, obviously, this was, Giannis getting the better of the young. I was going to call him the young buck. He's not a buck. He's a Spur of the youngster. And, just 10 points on, I think, 10 shots from Wemby.
10, I believe, from the field.
I mean, that's, one of probably his worst, certainly offensive games that he's seen all season. And, I mean, he has games where he shoots a ton of shots and he just misses shots. I thought the Bucks just did a great job of just, giving him different looks. They switched a lot on him. We saw, obviously, Giannis, I think, had some of the highlight moments just in terms of, one-on-one. Giannis was, I mean, he was on the limit of handsiness. It was not getting foul calls, which is great, and really bothered him. But, we saw the Bucks were not afraid to switch smaller guys onto him. We saw at times the Bucks would bring help when we turned it over a couple times. I think certainly his decision-making, he's a good passer or has passing talent, I would say, but some of the decision-making still leaves something to be desired. So, I mean, I think an A+ effort from the Bucks in terms of containing Wemby, and, started with Giannis, but really kind of was a gang tackling effort against a guy like him. And then on the other side, Bucks second game in a row, shot the ball really well. And offensively, a theme that we've been sort of harping on, the defense has been the weirdly consistent thing for this team. And we saw it again tonight. The offense has been the thing that sort of has come and gone. And fortunately tonight, it took a few minutes to get going a little bit in the first quarter, but they kind of built a lead. Second quarter, really stretched that lead out with some 3-point shooting. And then, absorbed some runs from the Spurs when the Spurs got hot from three, but, never seriously threatened. I don't think it got within 8 in the second half. And, I think it was just a welcome sight. Giannis still missed some layups. Obviously, Wemby's the hardest guy to kind of score on in the league. So, 1 or 2 of those maybe is okay. But, he kind of had another few that were gimmies that he missed. So we're still not seeing peak of his powers. Giannis coming back from the illness. But I thought Dame Lillard looked really good. Took a little bit of time to get going after that first quarter, but he looked in control, got to the rim repeatedly in the second half. And so, between those guys and Brook Lopez stretching Wemby and punishing him in the first quarter and first half. I thought that was really important. Brook with 22 points tonight. We often talk about wanting Brook to play inside. This is one of those games where his floor stretching is important, because we saw, when Wemby didn't have to guard, for instance, Ajax, in the second half when they put him on Ajax, it was like, all right, you got to get him off the floor. But when he's getting punished for not defending Brook, as we saw early in the game, that's how you can beat a team like this, which, Spurs came into this game 500. They've been, obviously they're an ascendant team, and they have some interesting young talent, and certainly still a very wily old veteran in Chris Paul, who had a nice run as well. A weirdly hot shooting from deep night from Chris Paul. But all in all, I'd say very good win. Spurs are a talented team, took care of business. Yes, you shot the ball very well, but I think defensively they played a really good game, and then did enough and got a really balanced effort on the other side offensively. So no major notes. Again, banking a win like this against a talented team, certainly no complaints, especially given how few kind of lopsided wins that we've seen. To get 2 in a row regardless of competition is a welcome sight, especially after some of the losses last week.
Yeah, losing 4 or 5 before winning these last 2 to get to teams that are under 500, like that was tough. So to your point about seeing this in back-to-back games in particular makes this even like a bigger win, which sounds kind of weird for a game, early January for the Bucks, but with where they were, they really needed this. And Damian Lillard, I'm glad you mentioned him because I thought he just looked really steady as the game went on. When Trey Jones was in front of him, Dame was kind of like eyes lit up, like, no, like this is a matchup I want. And he consistently took advantage of it. Love seeing Dame being really aggressive with that matchup and just exerting his will, because when the Spurs were threatening, Dame was somebody who came back and responded with a quick 5-point outburst, kind of helped steady the game a bit for them as well. And I'm also glad you brought up Brook Lopez, because I agree in him playing a really important role tonight with his ability to stretch the floor and kind of get Wemby out of there. In the second half, when the Spurs opened up and said, Wemby, you go on Ajax, I was like, they finally figured it out. They finally figured it out. And you saw Ajax get pulled a couple minutes into that corner for AJ Green, who I want to talk a lot more about in the next segment. But I think that third quarter stretch for the Spurs, I'm not sure how many other Bucks fans out there were getting nervous just seeing the Spurs kind of making headway against that lead that the Bucks have built up, especially with it coming off the heels of Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes, who really carried the Spurs in that third quarter. And 3-point shooting, I think, was like the big story there, because going into halftime, the Spurs had only made 8 threes the entire first half. The Bucks had made 12 at that point. They were 50% from 3. The Bucks were. Third quarter comes and the Spurs came out and they were 7-16 in the third quarter. They did not shoot as well in the fourth quarter to finish, but they started getting a lot of threes up. The Bucks couldn't have the same volume of threes as the Spurs did in that second half, but the Bucks were able to, knock them down at a steady clip, which really helped. So that second half run from the Spurs, I think that you got to talk about Gary Trent Jr. And then also in the first quarter, what AJ Green, or first half, I should say, what AJ Green was able to do, as well as, looking at what Bobby was able to do in this game, a little mixed bag performance, I think, for Bobby. And of course, Frank, we got to talk about Khris Middleton now that he's officially coming off the bench, and we'll get into all that plus more after this. Game Time makes buying tickets so easy. I am thankful for Game Time because I love going to live events, whether it's a sporting event, music, comedy shows. I love me a good comedy show. One of my favorite memories was attending the WNBA All-Star game last year. Me and my husband went on a random vacation to Phoenix. We realized we were there at the same time as the game. Looked up tickets on Game Time. We're able to see the arena, pick out our seats, and have a really good time watching Enrique go crazy and yelling 414 all throughout the arena every time she went hot. But Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out all the fluff. It only shows you incredible deals on great seats, so you won't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. This episode is also brought to you by Rocket RX. And if you're ready to boost your confidence and take control in the bedroom, Rocket RX has that solution for you. Imagine feeling more prepared and performing at your best. Rocket RX makes it simple and stress-free for you to do just that. Rocket RX offers FDA-approved treatments for erectile dysfunction at a lower cost than branded alternatives. So no more uncomfortable doctor visits or pharmacy trips. Everything is delivered straight to your door in very discreet and plain packaging. With Rocket RX, you'll get trusted care from a real U.S. clinical team. Complete a quick 100% online consultation, and you can get your free prescription today. Visit Rocket RX to get started now. It only takes about 2 minutes. And right now, our listeners can get 40% off your first order when you use the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's rocketrx.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for 40% off your first order. Terms and conditions apply. Rocket RX, better sex made simple. Hard to segue when talking about better sex into Bucks performance here, but I wanted to talk a bit about that Bucks bench. AJ Green came up big for the Bucks, I thought, in the first half. Two different situations where he had the back-to-back threes. Also, Frank, did he dunk? Did that count as a dunk of what he had on that breakaway when he hit the lane, went up off two, had two hands? Is that a dunk in your opinion? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it was a weird situation because it was like a semi-transition, and he just got the ball kind of running down the middle of the lane, turned around like nobody was challenging him, and he went up. And I don't think it was a dunk. I don't think it counts as a dunk. I think if he probably knew that there was nobody there, I think he gets up, and it was a two-hander too. So I mean, I think he would have been able to get a legit two-hand dunk down, but alas, it would have been the perfect capper on a fantastic first half from AJ. He didn't score in the second half, did he? Right? I think he was stuck on 14 points the rest of the game. He kind of was chucking some shots late in the fourth. And weirdly, I was looking it up. I was like, I feel like every time AJ has a really big scoring game, the Bucks lose. And I looked it up. He's had 3 20-point scoring games in his career, and Bucks have lost all of them, which is unfortunate. But yeah, fortunately, I guess it was a good thing he didn't get to 20, Camille, because then the Bucks would have had to lose. But yeah, he was great in that first half. You know, and I mean that the highlight probably, well, too, the second, I don't know if it was the first or second back-to-back. I think it was the second back-to-back threes where he gets the ball in the left corner and Wemby's there, and he kind of like hesitates for a second. And at that point, probably Wemby's thinking, all right, this guy's passing it. And then he just says, you know, F it, I'm putting this up. And Barry's just, you know, you can't shoot a very long three from the corner by definition, but that was about as long and as high arcing as a three as you're going to see. And then comes back right down. I think it was the next possession and pulls up from, 30 feet basically off a catch again in semi transition. So that was super fun. You could tell the building was hopping, right? I mean, there was obviously energy in that first half, just given the scenario, the Giannis and Wemby sort of dynamic thing. But hey, as much as Giannis, brought it, especially in that first quarter, got off to a fast start, AJ Green stole the show, and that was fun to see. And so, yeah, and then in the second half, I think is what you're alluding to, Gary Trent. I don't think Gary Trent scored in the first half.
He did not.
And then he just, as we've seen it so many times, right? I mean, both of these guys, they're good enough to be starting for this team, right? I mean, Gary started at the beginning of the year. He was the guy we assumed would be the starting shooting guard. I think especially talking about Khris Middleton, if Khris is going to be coming off the bench for an extended period, I would start AJ, because at that point you have Taurean Prince, who's, not in there for his creation and explosive scoring, let's say, even though he shot the three ball well. I would put AJ into the starting five at that point probably, but as long as they're both coming off the bench, probably the biggest challenge is just finding enough minutes for both of them, because as we saw, it's just a nice luxury, right? That just with these kind of mixed bench units, you just never know which one of these guys is, going to go on a run, score, hit 3 threes in 3 minutes or something like that. And we've seen it. Both guys are just capable of kind of giving just those little scoring surges. That is a big reason why, we talk about the Bucks offense with Dame and Giannis has been super underwhelming, but the flip side is like they've been surprisingly good when those guys have been off, or when, especially when Giannis has been out there without Dame. And I think a lot of it goes to, the credit of those two guys among others for being able to step up, and they don't need much room for sure. And we saw with Gary, he was kind of doing his thing, getting in passing lanes, and had that one, at least one or two, where again he pulls up. We know he loves kind of those threes in transition, which again we talk about how our team's successful in transition. Sure, having a Giannis helps, but there's only one Giannis. For everybody else, it's really about, for the most part, getting threes, open threes up in transition, and Gary certainly it does not hesitate to do that, and neither does AJ. And so you look at the half court numbers, they were awful for the Spurs. Spurs did do some damage in transition, but the Bucks did even more with plays like those ones that we saw from those guys.
Yeah, and to your point about what Gary Trent Jr. can do, like the Bucks were up 13 heading into the fourth, and I feel like he played such a big part in the Bucks being able to push that lead up by another 10 points in the fourth with like about half the quarter to go, making that lead feel real comfortable again for the Bucks. Gary Trent Jr. was perfect from the field, 5 of 5 from the field, 11 points in the fourth quarter alone there. Just some big shot making from him. And the fact that he is not scared of the moment, him or AJ Green, you give them a sliver of space, like you mentioned, and they have no hesitation in putting those shots up. And you need guys like that. I mean, we saw last season how cool it was offensively, and also how big of a plus it was to have someone like Malik Beasley for this team who you can count on getting up 7, 8 threes a game. And he does not need a lot of space, really quick shot, going to get that three up, because earlier in the season as well, we talked about just this Bucks team needs to get up more threes. They weren't getting up enough threes earlier in the season. And Gary Trent Jr., AJ Green, two guys who have really helped flip that script for this Bucks team, I feel like. Not the strongest game from Bobby Portis when you're looking at an offensive side of things here. Like, I felt like Bobby was continuously trying to get it at the rim, regardless of Wemby's presence, regardless of Wemby's help. He was going to try to force the issue a bit for him there offensively. Not the best night for him, like I mentioned, but he did have some key defensive plays there where he made some stops and some impacts there. But yeah, for Bobby off the bench, a little bit of a mixed bag, I would say.
I think you're being charitable, Camille.
You think so? I mean, look,
I think you're being charitable.
Plus minus doesn't always tell the full story.
Yeah.
Bobby still finished, with the what, plus 20 tonight, I think it was.
Yeah, I think that's the old Jeff Teague and the group project thing for Bobby tonight. Man, he looked completely spooked. Especially in the fourth quarter, he missed those back-to-back layups with Wemby kind of looming. I think he was 1 for 10 at that point, and he finished 2 for 12 or something like that. And it really felt like, man, just survive these Portis minutes and get Giannis back out there. So yeah, I mean, but that's, I think, the difference with this year's team. And obviously just talking about AJ and Gary, there were times, especially last year, where it felt like, man, if Bobby wasn't scoring, like there's just nobody who was going to score off the bench, right? Like he was like the only guy that could score off the bench. And, I think the upside this year for this bench team, this bench group, is that you've got, a bunch of guys that, on any given night can pop up and really help you and be that, kind of slump buster type guy, right? Like when kind of the offense gets into a funk, especially the shooters, right? They can kind of, any number of those guys can just pop up and hit a few shots. So yeah, rough night for Bobby on the old Twitter. Not a good Bobby Portis night.
On Twitter.
But fortunately, Brook Lopez, we mentioned him, 22 points, and especially the threes early, punishing Wemby. And it's interesting. I mean, this goes back to the Bud era, right? Like defensively, like how, like who Brook gets matched up on. He's gotten some very funky matchups, in the past, where he ends up, guarding like a point guard just because that guy is like the worst 3-point shooter on the team. And that was the case tonight with him defending Stephon Castle, the talented rookie for the Spurs. And did Castle make any threes tonight? I don't know if he did.
I don't think so.
Yeah, let's just say that little gamble paid off, because certainly they did not. They did not
0 for 5 from 3 for Castle.
Yeah, they did not punish the Bucks for that. And kind of a typical Brook night in terms of having a couple big blocks at the rim. Giannis, another great block at the rim, just throwing his body out there to who did he get? Did he get
Vassell.
Devin Vassell? Yeah.
Mhm.
Put himself at risk of getting posterized, but Giannis doesn't care, and that's part of what makes him so great. And Brooke kind of similarly also was able to defend the rim, I think, well all night. And again, that's why I think you look at the stats here, why it was a good defensive night for the Bucks. They only allowed 22% of the Spurs shots were at the rim. That's a very, very low number. And the Spurs were just 9 out of 16 from the rim, which, is 56%. That's, well below us. That's about, like league leading type numbers. Spurs only shot 50, or Bucks only shot 54% at the rim. So they didn't exactly cover themselves in glory on the other side. But, obviously the Bucks in general had a much better scoring night. But yeah, the Spurs, I think the Bucks just did a really nice job just kind of making them play in areas where, they just didn't look particularly comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And Spurs got up a ton of above the break threes, hit a good chunk of them. But other than that, they didn't get a lot of shots around the rim, didn't finish much around the rim, didn't shoot well from mid range. And, I think you just look at like Wemby and kind of where he was. It just felt like the Bucks did a really nice job of, never letting him kind of get going as a rim roller, and also just never looked like he kind of got comfortable attacking off the dribble, right? And I mean, there's times where he looks like, a 7'5" KD, which I think it's kind of a double-edged sword because, he can do the stuff that nobody else in the history of the sport has been capable of doing. But the flip side is like, when you see a 7'5" guy with his skill set and finishing, and he's settling for mid-range jumpers or really any kind of jumper, you kind of just say like, that's fine, like I
we'll give it to you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there was a couple of situations where the Bucks like been on pump fakes with him from three, but for the most part, like they kind of were like, all right, you know what? Like if you're going to shoot threes, like, and I think that's how you have to play him. Like he's, I think, a 36% 3-point shooter. So he's fine, but let him shoot those because it beats the alternative of, collapsing your defense or, having to try to stop him with a head of steam. But I think, I don't know, I'm just really curious just to kind of continue watching him just because,
Me too.
Like you watch him against somebody like Giannis, we saw him, there was that one play where Giannis got him. It was a rare occasion where Giannis really got him just like one-on-one, and he just basically did the battering ram thing. And then
flew out of bounds.
Yeah, just basically like created space and was able to shoot a little like push shot. Wemby was like been pushed basically under the basket at that point, and he hit a short little push shot. So and you can tell, I mean, like Wemby can't overpower Giannis. Like
right.
Giannis is, has a low center of gravity relative to Wemby, which is
it's crazy to say that.
The only guy that you could say Giannis has a low center of gravity against. But yeah, I mean, he can't move Giannis, right? And he, he's obviously got even longer strides than Giannis, but that's the other thing too. It's like he's got a good handle, but
it's still kind of loose because he's so tall.
Well, yeah, he's so tall, right? Literally, he has to get so low to be able to like protect his dribble that it's always going to be hard, right? Like I was curious, we often talk about Giannis being the best ball handling 7-footer the sport's ever seen, and Wemby is one of these guys I look at as like, okay, he could get in that conversation. It's him and KD, right? KD, I mean, it's basically like a wing.
Yeah, he's a big wing.
But KD doesn't go end to end the way Giannis does, and so far we haven't seen Wemby do that either. So I don't know. Wemby may just be too tall, to be honest, to be able to dribble, the way that Giannis does. But it's going to be fun watching, kind of however his game evolves. Obviously, the numbers are amazing this year, and so we'll see, right? It feels like, are we a year away from Wemby becoming just like best player in the league? It feels like we're some time away. At some point here, could be as soon as next year, could be 2 years from now, maybe 3, 4, whatever it is. But it seems like at some point there's like an inevitability with him. But on a night like this, you kind of see like, hey,
still a young guy.
He's still a young guy. His decision making isn't always great, and you got to be so skilled to be able to be effective if you're not using that size around the basket. And tonight, Bucks just basically said, we're going to show enough bodies and help, and we've got a guy like Giannis who can prevent you from getting to your spots. So yeah, Not the outcome ESPN probably wanted, but
Oh no, especially after that first game.
yeah, but we'll take it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm sure this also was a game for those people who hate seeing 7-footers shoot threes. They were probably sick to their stomach seeing, Wemby put up with 6 threes, seeing Brooke Lopez take 11 threes. Like, what is going on to the game I love? Personally, I'm here for it. But we got to talk about Khris Middleton, Frank, because there was a lot of news ahead of this game about him moving to the bench, a lot of conversation around that. And we got our first look at what that's going to look like. Well, I shouldn't say first look. We've seen him come off the bench already, but in a new defined role for him as he has his minutes restriction. So we'll get into that after this. I want to take just a quick moment, introduce y'all to a brand new mobile game that I'm excited about. It's called Ultimate College Basketball HC. So if you've ever dreamed about being a college basketball head coach, this is your chance to step into those shoes. In Ultimate College Basketball HC, you control every single detail of your program, recruiting players, hiring coaching staffs, overseeing training camps, and you even handing out NIL deals and managing scholarships. It's all in your hands. And when it comes to game time, you get to draw up offensive plays, set your defensive strategy. The way you play doesn't affect just the current season. It also will shape the future of your school's basketball program. So it's a game that really lets you feel the full weight of what it would mean to be a head coach and lead your team to glory. So take the special offer from Locked On listeners. Use promo code Locked On CBB, all caps, inside the game store to get a free boost for your program. It is the perfect way to kickstart your coaching career. So download Ultimate College Basketball HC, or you can visit ultimate-cbb.com or look it up in the app stores. Ultimate College Basketball HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. So ahead of the game, Chris Haynes broke the news early in the morning that, the Bucks were going to be moving Khris Middleton to the bench going forward. Eric Name came out, add a little additional context earlier in the day, just saying it's also part of the way to help manage his minutes right now as he's coming back off of this double ankle surgery. And pregame, Doc was asked about it as well. He mentioned the fact hey, listen, Khris isn't starting tonight. And it's more of just a minutes thing. He keeps getting the tendonitis in his ankles. It's just not improving to where we want it to be or where he wants it to be. So we got to continue to monitor it. Right now, we're just looking to cut his minutes back a little bit and really just trying to make sure that he can get through it. And when I heard Doc mention that, to me, again, it seems like the door is not completely shut on Khris ever returning to the starting lineup. But right now, just given where he is in his recovery, as well as where he is when it comes to his minutes restriction, coming off the bench makes the most sense for him with the way that Doc wants to run out his lineups.
I mean, maybe it will work, maybe it won't. It's been such a weird thing with this team this year, right? Because kind of as we talked about, the defense has been better than the offense, and when Dame and Giannis have been out there, they have not. They've individually gotten their numbers, but the offense has been pretty stagnant, and that's even though they've made threes. They've made threes when those two have been out there, but just everything else is just not where it was, especially last year when they were awesome with those two guys on the floor.
Yeah. So, awesome with those three guys on the court too.
Yeah, especially with Khris, they were even better. It was like a 125 offensive rating with the three of those guys together. So I think the first question is what are you trying to solve for, right? Okay, is it just hey, his minutes, we just got to manage him. He's going to be at 25 minutes and it's just easier to do this if he's, or if he's sitting out more games to try to manage it, right? Which, I mean, he hadn't missed a game until the other day, right? Other than the illness game in the NBA Cup final. So we'll see kind of what they do. But I mean, again, you look at the numbers, it's been weird, right? We have a huge sample this season, Dame and Giannis together. Offense has been basically league average. It makes no sense. It's way worse than it was last year. Again, it doesn't make sense. I think you can look at it. We saw Dame did get Giannis for a pick and roll dunk today. But I would say I mean, are they dynamically playing off each other a ton? Not really. We saw a nice little
you see moments.
And you see kind of the ghost screens from Dame and plays for him and things like that. You see moments, but I mean, there's a lot of your turn, my turn. But honestly,
Still,
like your turn,
yeah.
my turn should still work pretty well. Like last year, everybody talked about how like, oh, the chemistry isn't there yet. And they put up just monster offensive numbers when those guys were on the floor. So some of it is Ajax being in there for a shooter like, last year Beasley, or this year, if you had put, Gary Trent or AJ Green, obviously you'd expect the offense to be better. But the weird part is like when you take Ajax off the floor and you look at those numbers aren't really good either. I think they were actually worse. The last time I looked at them, Dame Giannis, no Ajax was actually worse than with them. So it's all just kind of like doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I mean, we're almost halfway into the season too.
Yeah.
So to me, this is like kind of like the biggest thing you're trying to like figure out. And as the coaching staff, like on the one hand, like you can't just say like, well, we're just going to be an awesome defense the rest of the way. Like, yeah, they're going to have to be vigilant on that end too, because I think certainly this team, doesn't have a lot of margin for error defensively. But I think on offense, I mean, it doesn't make intuitive sense to me that your best offense is not going to have Khris Middleton.
Yeah.
And when you look at the team, like it's like 96 minutes coming into this game, Khris, Dame, Giannis, they had the same defensive rating as last year, 107, which is phenomenal. So that trio, like the defense has been really, really good, but their offense has been like a 101 or 102 offensive rating. It makes no sense. Yeah. And you look at the stats, the 3-point shooting has been really bad when that trio has been together this year. It's like 29%. So I think in general, like, again, you don't want to pick and choose, but I think you can say like, I don't think that whatever struggles they've had offensively with Khris, Dame, and Giannis together, I don't think that's like somehow representative of the fact that they just don't know how to play together, or Khris is bad for the offense or something like that. I mean, Taurean Prince, he's cooled off a lot lately and can't really dribble or pass. So I'm going to go ahead and say that like even if Khris isn't shooting a lot, he's probably going to be better for the offense than Taurean Prince. So and the other thing too is like the starting five that they have right now, it's not good. Like their numbers are not good either, right? So again, it's like it's not like you're like, oh man, we want to get in Khris, but like they're just working so well without him. It's like, well, that's not really true either. So I think it's again, I've always made the argument like the whole upside and ceiling of this team involves playing Khris Middleton, Brook Lopez with Giannis and Dame. So you got to figure out a way to make that group work, and you got to give them minutes together and get them reps together. If you don't start Khris with that group, you're just going to get fewer reps. So it is what it is. Again, like nothing has really been working consistently lately. But I think my main thing is like, okay, if you're going to do that, like hopefully Khris at least gets more shots
up,
gets the ball more, so he can kind of like accelerate some of his kind of getting more comfortable with the ball. That to me is the major upside of doing it. And I think the other thing too is that I would say is, especially given like the Giannis Dame stuff, like there hasn't been a lot of dynamism this year. I would say like I would lean into figure out how you get more of Khris Giannis together, figure out how you get more of Dame Brook together. Because again, I think Brook with his screen setting, I think does something for Dame to unlock him that you don't necessarily get when Dame's out there with like Bobby, for instance. And likewise, obviously the Giannis and Khris chemistry is obviously something that we talk about all the time, which is really unique. So I mean, I think tonight it sucked because Khris had a couple really good 3-point looks late in the third quarter.
Yeah, they just didn't fall for him.
He just didn't make them. And if he had made those, then he's at like 11 or 14 points and like the whole night feels a lot better and blah, blah, blah. So, again, like whatever, it's just going to be a process with him. I think the main thing is that he's out there and his movement gets better sort of as the season goes on. And we'll just kind of see, hopefully it's not too stop and start. But as we've seen these last 2 years, especially 2 years ago, man, the first 3-4 months of the season, were just a roller coaster with Khris, different injuries, and he didn't start until late in the year. So we'll just have to see kind of what happens. But again, like if he's getting healthy, playing 25 minutes a game, my default would be figure out a way to get him back in the starting lineup. And if he's not in the starting lineup, kind of as I was saying, then I think, as much as I've liked what Ajax has brought, if you've got Taurean out there, I would probably say let's see if we can get, I would say AJ Green back into the starting five. I'd be open to Gary Trent as well, but I think AJ's kind of really proved that on both ends he's kind of the steadiest guy, and I think he's earned that. But again, we'll see. I mean, if they play like they do tonight more nights, then I don't think we're gonna have a whole lot to complain about. Because right now it's just about winning games and figuring out, the best way to do that. But again, like all these same guys are going to play. It's just about
figuring out that combination.
Finding those combinations. And honestly, I think a lot of it just comes down to like, it's weird. You think about like teams kind of half-assing the regular season. You always think of it as being like a defensive thing. Last year when, Griff was around, they were just sort of trying to outscore teams.
Yeah.
Now it's kind of weird because it's like they actually do try most of the time on defense. And there's, I think, more discipline defensively. But like the offense just kind of gets bogged down, and just the urgency, the pace in the half court, even to just like get into actions and things like that, just often just doesn't seem to be there. So I don't know. You'd think, Camille, like getting NBA players to play hard on offense would be the easiest thing in the world, but I don't know. Maybe the Milwaukee Bucks are once again just an exception to the rule here.
Leaning back into that defensive identity that we've seen before from the Bucks. But one thing about all of this, I'll say to close the show here, is that Doc Rivers has shown throughout this season that he's not scared to try stuff. Like if he's not seeing combination work right, he has no hesitation of making a move. So I don't think this is going to be the last time we see Khris Middleton's role change on this team. But for right now, I think it makes sense to have him coming off the bench while he's on that minutes restriction. But glad to see the Bucks get a win, back-to-back wins for this Bucks team. They have the Magic up next, who might have Paolo Banchero back next time we see them. So make sure you all keep it locked in to Locked On Bucks. We'll be back tomorrow with another show to get you ready for that matchup against the Magic.